Hi, Christine. How are you today?
Hi, Paula. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure. Look, what we do is we ask our guests about their journey into the early learning sector. Are you able to share your journey and your story with us today?
Sure. It's probably a very unconventional journey compared to many of your guests and people listening. I probably never saw myself working in the sector, but absolutely delighted to be here now. So I began my career working for one of the big four accounting firms. I did that for about a year and a half, and then really over that time realized that didn't feel very meaningful. I didn't want to be wearing a suit to work every day, and I wasn't having that human contact that I was craving. And I ended up actually getting a position where I joined the United Nations and went overseas to work. And I moved to Nepal, so a really small country in Asia, sandwiched between India and China, and did what I thought was going to be a year of humanitarian work. And that ended up being a career that lasted about 15 years. And so working with people that had been touched by natural disasters, working with a lot of women who were pulling themselves and their families out of poverty. And that was probably my first sort of touch point with the issue of childcare and how important it was. And what I sort of really quickly realised is that in a lot of countries, women often don't have the luxury of childcare and are doing really hard labour with their children by their side, and often those children being involved as well. So it really raised the importance to me of childcare. And as soon as, of course, as we started about talking about supporting women to start their own small business, whether it was a handicraft business or an agricultural business, the issue of childcare became a really key one. And how do we support women to work in those countries?
Can I
And
ask you, what was your role at United Nations?
yeah, so I worked for an organization called the World Food Programme. It's the largest humanitarian organization in the world. And essentially, that is after natural disasters or times of conflict, providing people with food assistance or cash so that they can meet their needs and get back on their feet. And in other contexts where it's a bit more of a stable environment, we were looking at what projects we could do, so more development focused projects to help people build their livelihoods to get out of poverty so they have enough to meet their basic needs around education, shelter. So that might have been supporting projects where we were helping women start their own, for instance, small handicraft business so they could then sell those crafts in the market. Or helping them, for instance, get more like a cow or a sheep to add to their agriculture. So it could just kind of lift them up a little bit and they could really get moving into a position where their children could then get educated and really lifting the family. So, it was a really exciting and interesting journey. And I think when I decided to come back to Australia after about 15 years of doing that work. And
So you were in Nepal all that time?
I was in Nepal, and then I worked in Africa for a while. So in Kenya, I worked in Somalia during the famine there, and then I actually spent 7 years working in the Middle East. So when the Syria conflict happened, I worked in Syria, I worked in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan. So I got to see some really interesting countries and I guess different ways that people do life as well. And then, so then after that, it was coming back to Australia, and it was actually even a crazy journey into superannuation. But I guess around that time, I started being really consciously aware that a lot of my friends, I had a finance background, and I became aware that a lot of my friends, really didn't know the basics of how to manage their money. And it doesn't matter how educated you are, how wealthy you are, these problems are really cross-cutting society when it comes to women. And at the same time, I was sort of becoming aware about what my own superannuation was being invested in. So having the history that I had, I sort of accidentally stumbled upon the fact that my superannuation was invested in weapons and tobacco and gambling and fossil fuels, and it didn't match my values alignment. And so over time, all of this took me on a journey to starting what is Australia's first superannuation fund targeted at women, which is Verve Super. And then during that time, again, we started doing a lot of campaigning around childcare as well and trying to support the childcare sector, because we began to realize that, one of the biggest influences on women's ability to build wealth and retire comfortably, all women, was having affordable access to childcare and ensuring that childcare educators are being, remunerated and rewarded and, recognised in a way that really matches their talents. And so I was really delighted that at the end of last year, we actually merged with a larger fund, and that brought me into Childcare Super. And so suddenly I was working for the same parent company that owns Childcare Super, which is Future Group, and just became absolutely delighted to be able to work across both Verve Super now and Childcare Super, and really think about how I can apply all the lessons I've learned to really supporting women in that sector to save to their retirement and better understand superannuation. Yeah. So probably one of the craziest kind of entries into the childcare sector. But now that I have 2 children of my own as well, I think, the sector really hits home how important it is. And, not just from, I think so much is often talked about the economic benefits of childcare and, the role it plays in the broader economy. And I think that's really important. But I think as a parent, any parent knows when you drop off your child, maybe for the first time, my most recent child was 6 months, and, the quality of that educator and the quality of that centre, nothing matters more in your life actually at that point than ensuring that you're handing over your child to people that you really trust. And so I think that's just given me a whole new appreciation for the sector as well.
It's funny, my older son is 29 and I actually still am friends with his educator, his first educator.
Oh, wow.
28 years ago. And also still know the owners of the childcare centre.
I can totally imagine how it happens. It's my 2-year-old about to turn 3 on the weekend, and we're having a small sort of get together at a playground, and I was like, who do you want me to invite? And she's like, the only friend she wanted me to invite was her educator, Sheila. And she asked me 10 times, is she coming? I say, yeah, she's coming. Oh, very good, Mum.
Because it's that they become for want of a better word, like a second mum, not a second
totally.
mum, or a big brother or a big sister, or they're their extended family.
It's incredible. It really is.
Especially when they're there full time, right? It's my kids are all full time in childcare, so it's amazing the impact our educators have. And also, I mean, what's even better, Christina, is, as you've known, just over the last 12 months, the amount of attention and support that the sector seems to be receiving in relation to the professional level of educators and their skills and talents being recognised and rewarded is, it's taken a long time.
Totally.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just have to go back to all of as I am sure our listeners would be intrigued, especially thinking about our educators and our centre managers out there who are listening, about what you did and how you did that for families, because of course that's what we're all here for, right? All our families, all our children, our next generation, and the amazing impact you would have had across such a variety of countries that were everything from famine to war-torn to natural disasters.
Yeah, it was certainly it was a real honour to have that job as well. I think being in those situations, I think probably my biggest learning was, at the end of the day, how similar we all are as people. People that can look incredibly different to you, having really different, life circumstances, upbringings, and you sort of still always can find humour in the same things, and, you can relate to those really basic things. And I think particularly around families, I remember I worked in refugee camps in Turkey with Syrian refugees, and children are children no matter where they are. And, parents still have that same parenting role. And I think, and the same with, I think also the role of education and care in those centres as well. And in most refugee settings, there is an effort to provide at least a primary school level of education. And I think something that really struck me was just how deeply important that is to everyone's mental health. Even if you're find yourself in this crazy setting where, you never could have imagined, and you've ended up in a refugee camp. And I'm thinking particularly from Syrian refugees, because they were, really, people in Syria were living lives much like us in Australia. And suddenly these doctors, nurses, teachers found themselves living in refugee camps in Turkey. And I think having that normalcy for children, being able to go off to school every day, have to sit there, respect a teacher, and even young kids were going as well, just to get that kind of routine in their day, and for parents being able to have a bit of respite. It was really, really important. And I think that, we see that the same mental health benefits for people in Australia as well. But in those settings, it's obviously really amplified.
Yeah, and you can imagine, it doesn't matter where you live, a family has the same family issues, whether the children have special needs, whether they, no matter what age group they're in, they've all got their own little learning nuances. And families. It would have been amazing in that Syrian refugee camp. I'd love to learn more about it one day with you. It's we here in Australia have such privileged lives, right? We've got the luxury of education, the luxury of running water and food and supermarkets, clothes, all of that. Whereas I can imagine the refugee camp, that's taken away.
Yeah, we really do. And I think, there's I think and there certainly are people in our society that are doing it really tough as well.
Yes.
And I think in the same way that it's often, if you think about the role of early childhood education, it's often, I know, centres and centre managers that actually have a lot of that day-to-day contact. And, I know that, centre managers often, they know which children are potentially struggling at home, need that support, and where those children can get into centres. We talk about it a lot, but when they can get into centres at a young age, again, in a similar way, even though it's a really different context, it can provide that stability that they need, a bit of routine, even proper nutrition. And so obviously a really different setting, but I can definitely see the parallels between, the importance of having that sort of environment no matter where you live.
Yeah, and that's actually such an important thing to get across, isn't it? That we are inherently all the same. All we want is our families, love, care, and
Children to do well.
children to do well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, well, we could talk about this all day because that's one of my favourite topics. Personally, but okay, let's move on to what we're actually here for. We're going to talk about Super 101.
Yeah.
And when we say super, we mean superannuation. So in preparation for this episode, we talked about various things. But the first thing, and this is new term to me as well, I wanted to cover with you was the idea and concept of hygiene.
Yeah.
How does that apply in super?
Well, I loved it because we talk a lot about financial hygiene and superannuation hygiene. And I think it's really interesting because normally it's sort of glossed over. But I think in the context of being on this particular podcast, I think a lot of your listeners will probably be able to relate to it. And I think it's, in a way, it's sort of, you can think about it in a similar sort of vein as you might think about hygiene for children as well. I guess it's those activities, behaviours, basics that we need to get in place to ensure health. And I think the way that we think about it is, what are those basic things that we need to get our head around, and the actions and that we need to do regularly, in the superannuation context, that will support our overall financial health. And it's funny because often when I talk to people about money, when we think about, okay, what do you want to achieve in life, and therefore what do you need to achieve financially to achieve that? And to be able to, to really bring an abundance of the things that you value into your life. Often it is really thinking about, it does really come down to what are these core things that we need to be doing regularly to make certain that we're on track. And I think that when it comes to superannuation, I think some of the basic ones that can actually be really important is, making certain that you understand the superannuation system and what it is. Understanding how much you're supposed to be being paid by your employer if you are an employee, and checking regularly that you're being paid that. That's really the basic. And I can tell you why that's so important. My very first job when I was still at university, I was a bookkeeper, and the company that I worked for actually ended up going into solvency.
Wow.
And they hadn't paid their staff superannuation for 12 months. And none of their staff knew that. Not one staff member was aware of it. Because none of them were checking their superannuation. And something that people don't realise is that if you get your pay slip and it says you've earned this much superannuation this week, fortnight or month, it doesn't mean that that's gone into your bank account. into your superannuation account. And so just getting into the habit of every 3 months, 6 months, checking that your superannuation is going up and that the money's going in. That's the basic, really important one. And the same if you're a centre manager, making certain that you are being really careful at paying that superannuation on time. And I think a lot of centre managers already know this, but the fines and the issues that you can get yourself into if you're not paying super on time is much, much higher than if you're not paying, let's say, your tax on time or other things on time. And so I think for everyone, that basic level of hygiene is really important. I think then something that we can all think about as well is just learning a little bit more about superannuation to understand, enough to understand, am I in the right kind of superannuation account? And so depending on your age, your risk appetite, you might want to be in a more aggressive account, which is likely to grow more over the long term, but also more risky. Or if you're older, approaching retirement, you might want something that is likely to have less growth, but is less risky. And so these are sort of some of the basic concepts, and I'm not going to spend time going into them now, but I think what I want to do is just pick the interests of the listeners to understand that this is something really important, and I'm going to go away and do just a little bit of learning and research.
Can I just ask you what you said?
One of the real reasons as well is that for many people who retire, it's their biggest asset. And so when I want to talk to people, the way I talk to people about it is to say, you wouldn't kind of just rock up and buy any old house without thinking about it or doing your research. And yet so many people just let their superannuation sit there without ever applying that same lens of thinking.
And in fact, sometimes you can end up with more in your super than your house is worth.
Totally.
The other thing I was going to ask you was, you were talking about checking your super. Now, I think I'm with you. I check my super every 3 months just to make sure it's there. And I encourage my children to do the same, that they check with their super accounts. And what I find from just their age group, that younger 20 to 30 group, is that they don't actually realise they can log in. They can get an app. They can, and they're so tech savvy, but it's not actually hard to manage.
No, these days. You probably remember back in, even in my first superannuation account, it was like I'd have to call up to get a balance check. I would have to write a letter. You're right. Everything is online now. Childcare Super, we've got a really, great, easily accessible portal. You could go in there, see, you can see how your balance is growing. You can see what contributions have been made. And so, yes, you're right. These days it is generally easy. There's not too many super funds that are still
no. And look, as much as we all love and trust our employers, it's just one of those things that you do for yourself.
Totally. And there's a whole range of, I think most of us have an experience of, at some point in our careers, a pay slip going wrong, being paid late, or someone's forgot some hours that you've worked. And in the same way, accidents and mistakes can happen on the superannuation side as well. So,
that's exactly right. And it's just, and then at least you have that time to alert the employer that something's not right, or, ring up the super fund or whatever it is that you're doing. So, I just want to get that out there, that anyone listening that hasn't checked their super fund, to me, the key takeaway from what we just chatted now, I know there's going to be more, is go and check your super balance.
Yeah, and also if you're listening and you're feeling a little bit embarrassed because you don't actually know who your super fund is with, that's also fine. That's not unusual. You can log in, have a look through your email accounts, but the best way is actually to log on. If you've got a MyGov account, you can go through, and in the ATO section, you can actually see what superannuation funds you have. So that's really good. And I think, the number one action for super hygiene as well is most people should generally only have one superannuation fund. So if you have multiple funds, it's super easy to happen, because if you change employers, if you change jobs, often you can open up multiple funds. You may not even be aware of it. What will happen is that you'll be paying multiple sets of fees. You might even be paying multiple sets of insurances, and if something happens to you, you don't get multiple payouts. So there's absolutely no point in paying that money. So, I think just another basic part of hygiene is knowing what super funds you have and making certain that that it is consolidated if that's appropriate for you.
And Christina, of course, anyone listening can reach out to Childcare Super as well and have a chat to you and the team
Certainly.
about all of this.
Certainly. And because we are a fund that is specifically focused on childcare, probably many, if not most of your members are probably with Childcare Super. So indeed, they can just give us a call. Everyone's very friendly and we'll help you. You make certain that you've got those basics in place.
Yeah. Oh no! Look, that's just amazing. And sorry, I did interrupt you. So you were going to move on to the next parts of the hygiene. So we've got our app, we've got our checking, we've got our find out what super fund you're with using MyGov, and then what's the next things there, Christina?
Yeah, so we're going to look to making certain that we trying to think about consolidating our super funds, if that's appropriate. And then thinking about the kind of investment option that we're in. And of course, there's, I think the next level of this as well is making certain that you're aware of what constitutes a good super fund and a good superannuation product. And that does require research to understand that. But this is just understanding things like, are the fees in line with, the median? Are the fees reasonable? And does the product actually suit my investment strategy? If you've got strong values and ethics around things that you might want your money invested in or not, does a super fund match those values as well, is something you might want to think about. So I think something that is really exciting for super, and I think maybe a way of twisting this instead of kind of seeing it as this huge daunting task, is that for many of us, superannuation is the first investment we make. And so because it's something that we often get signed up to with our first job, we don't mentally often think, this is an investment, this is money I control, I have power over it, particularly because we can't generally access that till later in life either. But it is your investment and you can make decisions over it. And I think what's exciting about that is that it's an opportunity that everyone has to actually learn a bit about investing. So to learn about how money can grow over time, how to make good decisions around that, and then applying that to your super. And then through those through that learning, and I'm not talking, you don't need extensive amounts of research, it's really sort of just understanding the basic concepts. You can then go out and make other forms of investments if you want as well. And I've seen lots of people that have, through learning more about their superannuation, they've then said, okay, well, I'm going to go and invest in shares now because I understand what it means to select a good fund. I know how to do that. I know, what sort of option is appropriate for how much risk I have and how I want my money to grow. And then they're able to go out and invest outside of that. And so, personally, it's something that I think could be a really exciting opportunity for people to actually, really proactively think about that money.
And like you said, it's that first investment opportunity, sort of around the age of anywhere between 16 and 20.
Yeah.
Depending on what sort of job they're doing at that age of 16. But it's most certainly a valuable lesson, as you mentioned. The other thing I was going to ask you was, I know there is a co-contribution as well that people should look out for.
Yeah. So the basics is sort of so I think the basic things to think through in terms of how you can contribute is thinking about, so there's the superannuation guarantee, and this is the minimum amount that your employer has to pay. Then you've got contributions that you can make. So you can also make additional contributions into your super. And I think this is something that's important because there can be, for some people, benefits to contributing more to your super because it's taxed differently. And so again, this is sort of like one of those basics about superannuation that you might want to discuss with your superannuation fund. So thinking about topping up your super as a way of saving. Obviously, you can't then take that money out until later in life, but it can be a really effective way for saving for retirement. And then the co-contribution you mentioned is actually for people that are on low salaries or medium salaries. The government will actually make a co-contribution. So that is that they may actually match or provide a contribution up to a maximum of $500, depending on how much you contribute. So again, these are really good things to learn about. And I think, just sort of doing any sort of basic Google research about how superannuation works, you'll be able to stumble upon these things. But I think the power of superannuation really relates to this concept that we call compound interest. And I'm just going to give you all a really super brief
This is
finance
the
lesson
accountant
on
part
this.
of you, Christina.
But it's the idea that if you invest $1, and let's say you make 10%, at the end of that year, you've got $1.10. And so when you invest that the next year and you make 10% on that, you're making 10% on a larger amount, and it keeps getting larger and larger. And that's why we talk to people about how even from a really young age, the money that you invest, or those additional contributions that you make when you're young, even in your teens or early 20s. So there was actually research done during COVID, and it found that people in their 20s that took out $10,000, for instance, during that early release scheme, that amount could have equaled $100,000 by the time they retire, the value of that money. So there's actually a really exciting offering that we have at Childcare Super, which is called Super Super, and it really addresses this issue. And it's a shopping rewards program. So it allows you to earn dollars into your superannuation when you go shopping. So you can do your shoppings at Woolies, Coles, there's heaps of retailers for your Christmas shopping, any form of shopping, heaps and heaps of retailers are signed up to it.
I think you said Maya earlier too, didn't you?
Yeah, Maya.
Yeah.
I believe is on there. And that allows you to, just start to save those small dollars, but the dollars that add up week on week, fortnight on fortnight, month on month, year on year, that could lead to really substantial increases in superannuation in later life. And that's really the reason why we designed that program, was because we know that a lot of people in the sector might struggle to put away extra money for their superannuation. And there's a lot of competing priorities for people at the moment when it comes to finances. But Super Super really is an excellent opportunity to do that without cutting any money out of your paycheck. So I really encourage listeners to have a look at it if you're with childcare.
That's a wonderful offering, Christina, because it's almost you're not thinking about it. It's almost growing your super without even you making any impact to whatever you do.
Exactly. And I think it goes back to, if we bring it back to that concept of hygiene again, a lot of finance is just what are those habits that I can get into that, might not seem to be huge amounts of money, but over 10, 20, 30 years really add up, and will allow people to retire comfortably.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I know we're certainly pushing our time a little bit here, but this is such a fantastic topic to share. One of the things I would love to ask you about, we certainly have a theme today about one-word prompts and things like that. The next one we have is value. Can you tell us about the importance of value for superannuation?
Yeah, so I touched on it a little bit before, but I think it's really about looking at the fees that you're paying, making certain that they are in line with the median, looking at the returns of the fund. So over the last 3, 5, 10-year period, some sort of short-term, longer-term period, how does this compare to the average of what super funds returned or other super funds have returned? And they're really the two key aspects of value. And then the third aspect of value that's really, really important is, what else am I getting for my super fund? And making something you're taking advantage of that. And, as I said, at Childcare Super, the superannuation, we've designed this specifically for childcare workers. So, thinking about the Super program. But another thing that we offer that's really incredible and specifically tailored for childcare workers is Virtual Care 360. And this is something that is attached to the insurance product that we have. And it actually allows our members to access for free mental health support, nutrition support, rehabilitation support, and other forms of healthcare support. And the reason why this is so important is we know that many people in the sector may just not be able to fund these services if they need them. And we've had examples of people who, particularly on the mental health support, were just simply unable to access that because the wait times were too long in their community, and were then able to use the services provided through the super fund to get the help they need. And so this is something that's super value. If you are with Childcare Super, just have a look at that program so you know that what's available in the case that you need it. And for anyone else, I think it's just thinking about what other value are you getting through the fund.
Wow. And also with that, talking about our early learning sector, obviously there's so much going on, so that support's fantastic.
Mm.
What I was going to say on top of that is any providers or managers that are looking for a super fund
Yes,
could talk to you, seeing it specifically for the sector. Childcare
exactly.
super, having that super, and encouraging their their workers and their educators to be part of such a wonderful group that supports that growth in superannuation.
Exactly, and I think for employers that virtual 360 program we offer is quite unique. But I think there's also a real benefit of that of employers that if you've got employees that are unable to get past some of their chronic health problems, or are unable to be supported with mental health when they need it, that's obviously going to keep them out of the workplace for longer and cause problems. And so I think there's a real benefit for employers as well. It's a way of making certain that your employees are able to access that support if they need it, which is ultimately going to help everyone. It's going to help get them back into work quicker if they need that support, and will help the centres hopefully operate better as well.
Yeah, because it's such a it's not, it's just so supportive of everyone from the owners right through to your staff on the ground.
Exactly. And, I know that a lot of owners would love to be able to provide these support services themselves, but there's obviously, difficult decisions that need to be made when you're running centres. And so I think, the ability for us to step in and be able to offer that and know that, and then operators knowing that's being taken care of, or that's
Yeah,
settled.
no, that's fantastic. Look, and I know our last topic today is ethical investment, and I know
Mm.
we've all heard the term before. Can you tell us why it's so important for the sector and what it means to you?
Yeah, so I think there's two elements of it. I think one is just, you know, the majority of people that I know that work in childcare, they do it out of the passion, and they do it because they're deeply values aligned people. They want to be doing positive things for society, and that's why they've chosen that profession. And I think in the same vein, we need to think about personally, I feel like we need to think about the impact that our money is making as well. So when we it's a crazy thing to think about, but when if we have superannuation accounts that are invested in whether it's fossil fuels or gambling or tobacco, we're literally providing those kind of companies with investment to grow. That's what our money is contributing towards, the society is contributing towards. And so for me personally, I know that making certain that my superannuation is aligned to my values is really important to me, and it's just part of how I live my life. I think the other element of it is that ensuring this kind of level of social responsibility is also important, we feel, for people's long-term retirement savings. So we feel really strongly that industries like gambling, tobacco, even, fossil fuels, coal, gas, these are industries of the past. And if we don't think about the risks associated with investing in these companies and putting people's retirement savings into these companies, then there is risk that in the future, in 20, 30 years, these companies will have gone downhill, and so will have people's retirement savings or the investment that we had in them. And so there's really these two elements. There's the issue of values, and there's the issues of how do we make certain that we're really thinking about the risk that some of these companies have, and making certain that we're protecting people's superannuation balances from where we think that there's industries that are putting their money at unreasonable risk as well.
Wow, that's actually something I don't even think about. Just
No, and I was very late in life when I realised what my superannuation was invested in. And to be honest, it's not that there's a whole bunch of sort of evil
no,
superannuation
no,
investment managers
no.
sitting there being like, I want to fund the tobacco industry. It's just this very traditional way of managing money that is just says, okay, I'm going to invest in the top 500 companies in Australia and the top 500 companies in the US, and I'm not going to even think about what those companies are doing. And I think there is really great research out there from Australia, the UK, even the US, that shows that funds that do think about social responsibility actually are tending to outperform other funds. And so where 20 or 30 years ago, this line of thinking was sort of seen as a bit hippie-ish,
I was gonna,
there's now some really solid research out of Oxford, out of Harvard, that actually backs up that No, surprisingly enough, thinking about these things can have a financial benefit as well.
Oh, because your social responsibility supports that, right? That's your thinking.
Totally.
That's your moral compass. That's your everything that you're putting into, and the reason you're there is to help the community.
Totally. Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, and look, obviously everyone makes their own super choices, but it's just so nice having an idea of what's available and what to look for, and those basic steps that you explained earlier. But that ethical investment, and I'm with you. I think our educators are here for a reason to support our next generation, look after the community, and therefore it would be a great idea to work out where's my money invested, what am I supporting, and make decisions that work for you.
Yeah, and I know, and I think if I can just leave listeners with one thing, it's just, every educator has the skills that they need to understand their superannuation and the other areas of finance. They're absolutely, they're smart enough, they are educated enough. They may not have been brought up as children talking about this. They may not have learned about it at school, but everyone has that ability. And so, why not, get involved, feel a bit empowered, jump online and just start researching and learning that the money's sitting there anyway. So why not see what you can learn to make it grow for your future?
Absolutely. Look, and I remember back to when I first started paying super, and I was young, 16, 17, and thinking, it's so long away to when I'm got to think about old age and retirement and
Yeah.
what am I doing? And all of a sudden I'm here.
Yeah,
And I think, it happened quicker than I thought it was going to.
Totally. And I think something that, my personal story of why I'm passionate about this as well is that first job that I had, I didn't think about super. I didn't care about it. Left the job. I think at some point I've been with the UN, looked back about 6-7 years later trying to find that super fund, and I'd had something like, I don't know, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 in it. I had nothing left in there. And what had happened was that they'd had us on insurance. I'd signed up to insurance products with really high fees. The fees of the account, so had fully eroded my entire balance over that period of time. And that could have been a really substantial amount for my savings. And so that's also why I'm passionate about just educating people to, understand more about their super.
Yeah, and also, look, I know the majority of our workers in early learning are women, right? And
Yeah.
we know that women in general have less superannuation at this point than men.
Totally. There's the pay, the super gap. It can vary, but it's
very real.
Around the 25% mark.
Yeah.
Women retire less than men.
Yes. So there's a lot of catching up to do, and if we can help support our early learning workers coming in at that age of 17, 18, 19, look at super, look at what you can do. Don't think it's not going to happen to you and it's going to be years away, because I can tell you it's different. You get here very quickly, and make the most of that at an early age. I know, just totally off topic sort of thing, but I make my children at the age of 16 open a super fund, and they all had to contribute.
Love it.
$10 a week.
Love it.
And I said, as you get a pay rise, you add another $5 and add another.
Oh,
$5.
you're a real advocate.
I'm a real advocate. Yeah. So my daughter's only 23 and she's got a great super. Same as my boys. They're because I said don't rely always on your employer. And even when they were not working, they still had to pay that money out.
Great. Yeah.
So it was encouraging not only about that super thing, but it's also getting them to look at their super fund, managing that super fund at an early age.
Exactly. That's awesome. Oh, well, I'm feeling inspired, Paula, because I don't normally.
You can do it. They didn't know what they were doing. There was a lot of to and froing and talking about exactly what you sort of talked about. But it was like, it's for a 16, 17-year-old, $10 a week's nothing now.
Yeah.
It's simple. It's 2 cups of coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can tell you, my daughter at the age of 23, she's very happy with her super fund of doing that.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. And of course, working through that, you've still got your employer guarantee, all of that sort of thing to keep going. So look, I'm a big advocate for really good super, and taking it by the horns from an early age.
Yeah, I love that. I love it.
Yeah. Look, so before we finish up, because I know we've certainly gone over our time, but super is so important, like I said, What do you think the big challenges are facing the sector in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably from our perspective, it's really around obviously the workforce, and there's obviously been so much focus on that. And yeah, we're very supportive of seeing that government funded pay increase coming through. But I think there's just so much more work to be done. Like, I really think that our childcare workforce is really some of the most talented, hardworking workers that we have in the country. And I think we're starting to get there in terms of that recognition, but nowhere near. And it's really clear to me that if we're to, if we're really to get to the point where everyone's able to access everyone's able to access childcare, that it's affordable, we're really going to need to build that workforce. And my concern is that I think if we look at it more from the government perspective, that we're still not investing enough, and there's still too much burden on childcare workers in terms of their workload, their mental health. So yeah, we're really glad to see things in good trajectory, but we want to see that continued.
Yeah, no, that looks it's and the only way is up, really, isn't it? We can only
Yeah,
do better.
that's
So,
true.
yeah. Now, before we do finish up, what I do love to know is what's your personal motto or your wise words that you would like to share with us today?
Oh
Something that's
God.
inspired you, and you've done some amazing things, Christina. You're almost inspiring. You are inspiring. What do I mean
Oh
almost?
my
It is.
God, I'm trying to put it all into I guess how I live my life is that I really focus on experiences over money, I think. So I really have always, when it comes to my money, I've always thought about how can I build those experiences. And even in terms of my career, when I was early on, I always thought I was always trying to collect experiences rather than just go to the job that had the highest salary. And I think that really helped me in my career. But I think in life that's really helped as well, is really thinking about just what experiences and what moments will bring joy, and how do I kind of bring more of those into my everyday.
Oh, actually, that's lovely. I love how you said that. Bring joy. I think that's what we all need more of, bringing joy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's surprising just how out of touch sometimes we are with what truly does bring joy, and how we could create more of that in our lives.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And it's actually, once you start to think about it, joy is such a lovely part. Like, that's such, well, even when you say it, you feel good.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Oh, look, well, thank you so much today for your time today, Christina. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing more from you. And for all our listeners, we'll share everything. We'll put up information about Childcare Super, the Super Super. And like I said, we'll have information there for you to reach out to the team as well. Thank you for your time, Christina. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.